Okay, so I'm not mic'd right now, so I'm going to project and try to be as loud as I can. But good evening, everybody, and welcome to Duke University and Rose Hall. My name is Viveka Mehrotra, and I am currently a sophomore studying computer science and public policy. Thank you so much for being here tonight to join us for tonight's fireside chat with Ambassador Shefali Razdan Duggal. We are currently being hosted tonight by Science and Society, if you may, before we get started, if you can please silence your cell phones, that you should explain. And
you too.
And before we get started, I would also like to thank our sponsors, Duke Science and Society, Duke American Career Strategy, Duke Women and National Security, and Duke Tech for Change. All of these organizations have done so much for our ambassador's visit over the past couple days. So I'm delighted to introduce our co-moderator, Dr. Tommy Sowers, who leads Applied Technology Ethics Programming within Duke Science and Society over here. And I was lucky enough to be one of the students as part of the Applied Ethics Plus program this summer, and he has been one of the most wonderful, kind, and radically candid mentors I have ever had. And I am incredibly grateful for him and this opportunity tonight. And he will be guiding the majority of tonight's conversation. And without further ado, it is my honor to introduce today's distinguished guest, Ambassador Shefali Razdan Duggal, who is a former United States ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Can you give a round of applause? As she likes for me to call her, Ambassador Shefali was sworn in on September 20th, 2022. And in doing so, she made history as the first person of color to serve as the U.S. ambassador to the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Her career reflects a remarkable blend of diplomacy, advocacy, and service. She is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Council of American Ambassadors, and serves on the board of the Netherlands America Foundation. She has been a strong voice in political advocacy, holding leadership roles with Biden's 2020 presidential campaign, the Democratic National Committee, and Emily's List. Under President Obama, she was appointed to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum Council and later continued her service as a Western Regional Advisor. But her journey is just as inspiring as her achievements. Born in India and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, she was brought to the U.S. at the age of 2 by her single mother, who worked tirelessly at 2 minimum wage jobs to support their family. From these humble beginnings, Ambassador Shefali built a path defined by hard work, optimism, and service to others. She's become a proud, naturalized U.S. citizen, and just 18 years old, carried her belief in the American dream with her ever since. Her work in the Netherlands has not only strengthened the U.S.-Dutch relationship, but has also been recognized in extraordinary ways. On International Women's Day 2024, the Dutch honored her by naming a tulip in her honor, the striking pink Tulip Shefali. She is the first ambassador from any nation to receive such a tribute. That same year, she was nominated for the U.S. Department of State's Sue M. Cobb Award for exemplary diplomatic service, another first for a U.S. ambassador to the Netherlands. Ambassador Shefali is just known for leading with authenticity, kindness, and positivity, and I've only met her for just a little bit over a day, and she's only continued to inspire me. And she actually handed me over her business card, and we've been in email correspondence for around the past month. And I noticed in her signature and in everything, she has this vision and this lovely Sanskrit proverb I would like to share with you guys today that I think is just so defining of her character. And it goes like this. Look to this day, for it is life. In its brief course lie all the realities, the truths of existence, the joy of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. Today well lived makes every yesterday a memory of happiness and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. And I could not describe Ambassador Shefali any better way with how she approaches public service. And she just continues to inspire me the next generation, encouraging others to believe in themselves and the possibilities of this great country that we call home. And today, she will share her perspective on how technology is transforming international diplomacy, from the role of the Dutch chipmaker, ASML, and US-China tensions, to the global impact of the EU AI Act, and what ethical, effective diplomacy looks like in a world reshaped by emerging tech, rising conflict, and shifting alliances. So please join me in warmly welcoming Ambassador Shefali, who I can now proudly call her. Following. Oh, am I supposed to talk now?
Well, no, first question.
Okay, so before we kind of kick things off,
Well, and real quick, we're going to set some rules here. This is not just going to be you watching us talk to the ambassador here. Viveka's going to ask a question, I'm going to ask a question, and then we're going to turn to the audience for questions. I may ask a few more than that. So get your questions ready.
so before we get everything officially kicked off, Ambassador Shefali had mentioned that you've known Tommy for a while, and there is a New York Times article that you maybe wanted to talk about before we kick things off?
Yeah, so I've known Tommy and now Erica and their beautiful babies for a long time, but I met Tommy actually many years ago, I think it was 2010, when he was running for the U.S. House. He was running for Congress, and I went to an event he was having in San Francisco, and I had read his bio, and I was so impressed with his background. And who else should learn his background if you don't know it already? And we realized very quickly that we had very similar values. We looked at the world in the same way, and we've been very dear friends since. And then after that, of course, began close with his wife, Erica. He's right here, and there's 4 babies. And the New York Times story, which I wanted to mention because this actually, I do tell Tommy that this is very meaningful to me. So in 2016, there was a WikiLeaks situation that happened in the Hillary campaign, and I was working on the Hillary campaign. And for some arbitrary reason, so they actually, they went into the DNC, they hacked the DNC, and they made a decision on whose emails sent to the DNC they would actually publish. And they published, not from my email, but the DNC's email. It's still, I think it was 29 or anything else. They were all very, innocent. They were just doing business, political business. But a decision was made at the New York Times to create an article around a few of our emails and make it appear as if it was more nefarious than it actually was. So they led, in the New York Times, they led with my name at the top of it, and they talked about my emails and my relationship with the DNC. And if that happened today, I would be quite okay and used to it, because now I've weathered a bit more of this. But in 2016, that was very new to me. And when it happened, I was, perhaps it sounds almost innocent, but I was crying. I couldn't believe that things were being said about me that were untrue. And I know there's this concept of, but you're in politics, but I was never front face. I was always someone behind the scenes. So I was so startled by this. And very instinctively, Dr. Sowers, Tommy, who was my very dear friend at that point for 6 years, calls me and starts just comforting me and explains to me that if you weren't, someone that was actually doing something, they wouldn't act, and just basically going through this exercise with me. And even after that, it took me a while, but it's one of those things that you process a little bit more as every day goes on, and you realize how kind and empathetic that was. So I did want to mention, along with, I know he's like probably an incredible, how did you say, a radically candid human and professor, perhaps even a tough professor, but he is an incredibly empathetic human. And I just wanted to mention that's also a very meaningful part of my relationship with him. So, yeah.
So So I think we're going to jump in to our first question, which is, you said you were born in India and grew up in Ohio. So what early experiences do you think most shaped your worldview and your commitment to public service and your career?
Okay. When you see me doing this, it's because I was mentioning all the things I've done so far. I don't want to miss like an actual data. I think that's why I jotted down. So yes, born in India, moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania when I was 2, and then Cincinnati when I was 5. And I will say the one small thing is I actually did come with both parents, and then there was a break after we got here. And so then my mother became a single mother and worked minimum wage jobs. So in terms of public service, the moment that I knew I was very, very shy, very introspective, I'll actually even go to the extent of saying a very broken little girl because there was a lot going sideways in my house behind closed doors, and it was deeply unhealthy in every possible way. And so I was much more introspective and cerebral than other little girls. And so at that period of time, so when I was 9, I was watching at that time there was the world news that was happening from 6:30 to 7, national and world, 6:30 to 7, 3 networks. Like, it wasn't like what we have now, but so 6:30, I was watching the news. And I remember it was 1980 when I was 9 years old, and I was just sitting there. And all of a sudden, it was a very big presidential election happening at that point, which was the incumbent, who is Jimmy Carter, and Governor Ronald Reagan. Now, I had no idea what my political leaning would be at that point. I have no idea. But what I did know was something at that age, at the age of 9, I had this incredible epiphany, which was, how is it that these 2 men, and I knew a little bit about their background, like how is it that these 2 men who came from nothing, if you boil it down, one was a peanut farmer, Jimmy Carter, and the other came from a very broken home, Ronald Reagan. Neither came from money, neither came from privilege, neither had anything handed to them, nothing handed to them. And I thought, these 2 men, these 2 humans were in this position of running for the most powerful position in the world, in the greatest country in the world. And I remember thinking at that little moment at 9, this country is a miracle. I was also concurrently thinking about what my mother was going through. So I started realizing from that age of 9, as the years were going on, that I wanted to be part of the solution for people like my mother. So my mother was a seamstress during the day, and she worked at the local grocery store in the evening, which is called Kroger. I don't know if it's here. Okay. So she was cutting vegetables. So she didn't have the ability to raise me because she was always tired and always working. But I did know that she was not getting a fair shot in life. And so I thought about, what can I do in life to help good people get elected that could help women like my mother? So that's actually, that is how I developed a deep interest in politics. It wasn't quite policy at that moment, but it was politics. And it absolutely solidified my worldview in wanting to be altruistic and also empathetic to others around me. And that's how I've led, and that's always been my North Star. So if people ask what's the motivation, even at the age, I'm age 53 now, and I've never lost my focus of why I'm doing what I'm doing.
So, Shefali, and thank you so much for coming here. I remember at Science and Society, we're trying to build these like interdisciplinary leaders that can understand technology and science, but also understand law, policy, business, all that stuff, because I think they're good. And in September of 2022, you were confirmed. I think in September 2022 was when the CHIPS Act was passed. You arrive a month later and present your credentials in the Netherlands. And, the Netherlands has ASML.
Yep.
And So I did a McKinsey project on like a chip thing. It's a complicated, chips are really complicated. And, with ASML, you've got immediately on like day one, you've got a new law passed that sees chips as a strategic asset, has export controls in place. The U.S. wants the Netherlands to start restricting their sales. ASML is a private company. And this is all AI stuff. This is like when AI is kind of coming on the scene. So it's kind of a two-part question. Like, how did you personally like ramp up on understanding this really complicated geopolitical thing? And then how do you, any stories or anything, because eventually the Netherlands came along and created their own, export controls, but how did you kind of navigate these really competing, complicated stakeholders, the president, a law, profit, a private company in the Netherlands, a sovereign country that you're there to serve? I just think it's a great prism into like this ramp up from seeing you at your reception in September to 2 months later you're in the midst of this.
Yeah. Actually, I know. Thank you so much, Tommy. And I actually realized I wanted to first start off by thanking a couple of people. I went straight into your excellent question. So I wanted to thank Tommy. I wanted to thank Ben and the entire team. I also wanted to thank Viveka, Angie, Annika, and Celia, because they were taking care of me today. I wanted to thank all of you. It's been an incredible experience. So how did I
Get smart, and how did you navigate it?
So actually, as I was preparing for my Senate confirmation hearing, when the White House, after you get announced, you get nominated, background check, nominated, announced, and then you get sent over to the Senate to start preparing for your confirmation hearing in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. ASML actually was something I studied to prepare for the hearings, because the SFRC, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, is actually composed of 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans. So was very aware that this likely will come up because ASML is in the Netherlands. So I was in preparation with the nuances of ASML and lithography machines and the DUV and the EUV, all of that. I started preparing for that for my hearing. But then once I got to the Netherlands, and it was a very immediate conversation, because of the timing, I was consistently being prepared by my team. So 450 people worked for me, and they were divided by several sections. And let's say Paul Econ was one section, and they were in charge of continuously keeping me prepared with there's seats up here. So yeah, and for hearing, for preparing for these meetings. So I was in constant preparation from my team. So I do want to say that, and it was very nuanced. It was very nuanced. Now, what I would say in terms of how to handle the complications of the varying and frankly competing interests, while it was, of course, important what the Netherlands thought, but my one and only directive was to represent the interests of the United States. And that would be the State Department, the NSC, and also the Department of Commerce, which was Gina Raimondo at that time. So the NSC, Gina Raimondo, and State, Secretary Raimondo, we were constantly in touch, but I was given instructions on what I needed to convey. It was a complicated situation because the Netherlands, so it was the Netherlands, Japan, and the United States, the Trilac countries. And so it was complicated because the Netherlands felt like they were being told what to do by the United States. Because the United States would have very strong directives on what they were strongly hopeful that would happen. And the Netherlands, of course, didn't want to appear as if they were being pushed around. So they would also sometimes in the press, and these ministers were wonderful. It was kind of an understanding that we would have a great meeting, and then in the press, you would see something very different. But it was kind of this understanding to save face. So it was an ongoing thing. It got more and more complicated because the Dutch felt that the United States kept pushing the goalpost past what they would agree to something, and then the U.S. will say, well, that's nice, but we actually need this to happen. And it was all for security reasons. It was for security reasons. But when I was approaching these conversations, it was very clear I was approaching as a representative of the United States. I would bring back the interests of what the Dutch might be concerned with, but it often wasn't really moving the needle.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So
I feel like there's a lot of questions that I have on representation, and that kind of guided a lot of our discussions today. So what has been the most profound example of where you felt like that your identity has empowered you within your career as a diplomat, as a public servant? What has most stood out in that realm for you?
okay, thank you. That's a really nice question. Thank you. So I would actually say that in terms of my identity, which I very much identify, of course, as an American, but as an Indian American, because I operate very much as an American, but I have a tremendous amount of Indian values in the way I do things. And so I wouldn't necessarily say how it empowered me. I would say how it empowered others, because I talked and talked so openly about who I am, what my identity is, and along with that, not just I talk about the challenges that came with it. It took me longer. I had to work harder. I had to deal with more. I had to accept a lot more things said to me. I had a lot of, even as ambassador, you're the ambassador? Like, what is that? Is that racial? Is that sexist? Is that, what is that ageism? Like, what is it? For an ambassador, I'm young, by the way. I know I'm not young for you guys, but so I would say how it empowered me is to know that it empowered other women of color, both at, let's say, specifically talking about my time in service, both at the State Department and also in the Netherlands, the Dutch women of color. They had never seen someone like me enter the scene as the U.S. ambassador, and the way I owned it and the way I really talked about it. And so it empowered them. So I would say to me, and that's also why I'm going around to universities right now, because my purpose is to give some droplets of information and optimism and encouragement to students. So that's how it empowered me.
I mean, like,
Let's start with actually Iman.
Iman?
So I guess kind of segueing off of this, my question is, not only as a woman, but as a brown woman, did you ever encounter examples of people trying to tokenize you? And if you did, how did you sort of break past that?
Tokenize me meaning what? Meaning?
Like, for example, they put you in a position just to kind of show that we have a brown woman in this position of power.
No, actually, they would try and keep me out. They were doing the opposite. Because I'm going to be honest with you. Perhaps they were tokenizing other brown women. I think I came across as so much owning who I was, and I have a streak of holding people accountable very openly. That for instance, like if I would walk in a room, I happen to notice I was the only brown person or only woman, let's just hypothetically say either one of those, I wouldn't sit and let people look at me and say, oh, we have representation. I would actually say, why are there not more? Like, where's Iman? I thought she was quite good. Why are you here? And so they actually didn't tokenize me, but they often did, they would perhaps try to keep me out or try to minimize me. They would minimize me more than they did anything else. And then I came back a little bit harder and stronger then. Now, that's not only what trained me with that, I'm going to say is that's in the professional environment. if you grow up in an environment culturally, whatever your culture is, it doesn't have to be brown, it can be just really you come from an extremely conservative family where women are viewed a certain way, you learn from a young age how to fight that and what it feels like, even if it's passive aggressive, you know what it feels like. And so then I just chose to not accept it. So,
Shefali, I want to build on that for a second. It's a dynamic that I experienced when I served as a senator for political 20 years. You show up and you arrive at the location, and in this case, you had 450, career civil servants and Marines. And I think you told a group earlier, the first time you were in an embassy was like when you walked into the embassy as the ambassador. I remember this when I walked into the VA. It's a non-obvious tension, I think, of how did you win over the civil servants, the folks that can see you as, I don't want to say the temporary help, but you're there for a period of time. That this is the career that they've dedicated to. What was your approach to winning over the embassy staff?
yeah. So thank you, Tommy. So, and let me just explain a little bit what Dr. Sowers means there. So for instance, ambassadors in the United States, ambassadors have 3-year terms. Whether you're a career ambassador, which is 70% of our diplomatic corps, or you're a political ambassador, which is 30% of our diplomatic corps, it's always 3 years. So most other countries, it's 4 years. So when you're coming into an embassy, you've got, for instance, the realism here is in the Netherlands, it was 450 people, and they're from the point they start their service somewhere in their 20s, like they're career folks. So they're seeing, and they might even be changing embassies, but they're seeing ambassadors come and go. So a lot of times, the Dutch people that work there specifically, they've been working there for 30 years, and they're just like, there's another one. There's another one. We just got to get through these 3 years with this one. And every ambassador has their own style, right? Has their own style. Now, political ambassadors on a whole, I will say, have a reputation of being entitled, perhaps a little lazy. Career ambassadors are like, they're there for the job. Because political ambassadors are getting their jobs because they're presidentially appointed or handpicked by the President of the United States, whoever the president is. So people on staff, they're just waiting it out, but as political ambassadors may not. Again, this is just a broad reputation. They may not be doing the work. They may not be reading your documents. They're just there for the title, because ambassador, we keep the title for life in the United States. They're there for the power, the pomp, the circumstance. I didn't approach it that way. So, that's what they didn't know when I arrived. So I had spoken earlier, I worked 90 hours a week because I felt it was extremely critical that if President Biden entrusted me to go and be his representative on the ground to a host country, which is the first country that ever acknowledged the United States to be independent, was the Netherlands, I was going to do everything to make my country proud. And so I worked really, really hard. But that said, I had my own style, which was I am like what you're seeing. Any given day, I was dressed like this at the embassy because I am someone who really believes in being yourself and being true to who you are, and you can still do the job incredibly well. I was unwilling to mold myself into the stereotype of what an ambassador was, which is a black, like Carrie Russell's character, in The Diplomat, which how they were dressed, she's dressed, is not very far off from what the expectation would be. And the rest of that show is pure fiction. I just I just do it now. Like I was like, get the secretary on the phone. I'd be like, can the secretary see me? So anyway, so how I broke that down is how I break down everything in terms of at the embassy, because they saw this outgoing person who, I'll just say, like, wore bright colors, who was very affectionate, and they immediately probably think, oh, this is a show horse. this is a show horse that Biden sent us. And they didn't know that I'm actually a workhorse that happens to look like a show horse. And so how I would say convinced, but how I developed credibility at the embassy is I just worked really hard. I worked really hard and I was hyper prepared for every meeting. I wasn't accepting half effort work coming into me. And it's over time consistency. And people would see how well I was doing with the interlocutors, which means the Dutch, And so I worked very, very hard. And also my approach was very different in that I am not someone who is into titles. I'm not into the artificial power of things. And so they also saw how I was treating people at the embassy. That I was, a lot of times they're like waiting for the other shoe to drop, which is like, okay, she seems nice. When's she going to stop being nice? Okay, she's working hard. When's she going to stop being hard? Still working hard. And so they also saw how I was treating people, like in a very genuine way. So it broke down all the barriers. And the Dutch, I will say, also had the same reticence with me because they also were like, she's like, I'll shake the hand of the Minister of Defense when I first meet him, but when I leave the meeting, I'm giving him a hug. And they're like, what's happening, And then they all were like, okay, she's really just very nice, but she knows all her stuff. So it's just from consistency, but it's again that what we were speaking about earlier, you work so hard, you outwork everyone around you, and then the proof is in the pudding. But you don't show off about it, you just show up and do it.
Yep. Questions? We'll go center in the back and then to you next.
My question is about
Allie!
Yeah.
It's one of my daughter's best friends, so.
Yes. Good to see you. Thank you for coming to speak to us. My question is about how you view diplomacy in the world we live in now. What do you think the most important part of diplomacy is, and if you see, the inconsistency that's coming out of the current administration being a harmful practice for the prospect of diplomacy going forward.
Yeah. It is very complicated, Allie. I want to be fair to the people that are going through the process because in their own way, they're absolutely patriots too, that love their country. But what I would broadly say, I'm talking about the ambassadors, but what I would broadly say is making enemies out of your friends is not perhaps the most thoughtful long-term diplomacy. Just in the news today, I read how, so in the country of Denmark, which is a kingdom that oversees Greenland, there's a charge, which means there's not an ambassador yet, but someone, from the State Department is representing. And the Danes just found out that this charge has been having active conversations with Greenland, trying to basically convince them about how it's just such a wiser decision to be with the United States. I can name a couple of current appointments that are these kind of things are happening, but diplomacy, I think it needs to be much more long-term in its thinking, like the very immediate desire to make money, like what's happening with India, the 50% tariff. What you end up doing is when you don't have positive diplomacy with not just your friends, but just where you should, India now is aligning with the PRC, with China. India and China have been not necessarily friends, not enemies, but not friends. You're getting, what is that? I was talking about this quote earlier, this Sanskrit quote, which is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So there are countries aligning now that are problematic for the United States. But if you're not treating them properly, I'm not quite sure what other answer there is. So diplomacy in the past has been really about presenting the best of the United States, top down, top down. But it's changing a little bit because there are other interests at mine. I don't know that it's positive, but what I do know is that, and this is my hopeful, slightly Pollyanna personality, which is negative moments do not last forever. And it will center back.
Gentleman in the back.
Hi, my name is Aviv. My question.
Aviv?
Yes. My question is about the Russian-Ukraine war.
Yep.
The Biden administration makes a very concerted effort to kind of unify the continent of Europe against Russia as in favor of Ukraine when the war broke out. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to your experience contributing to that initiative, and then also how you navigated aligning U.S. interests with that of the Dutch.
Actually, the U.S. interest was extremely aligned already with the Dutch. So the Dutch are actually, I don't know the exact number, but they're, I think, a top 10. Let me go back. This number may have slightly changed. I do think it's about the same, but the Dutch are in the top 10 of weapons, humanitarian, and just broadly financial suppliers to Ukraine. The Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, has now gone on to be the NATO Secretary General. So in terms of, with the Netherlands specifically, they were already, you were talking about the EU, but my work was not with the EU, my work was with the Netherlands. So the EU, that ambassador is was in Brussels. But the Netherlands already had a very complicated, contentious relationship with Russia because in 2014 there was a plane crash, the MH17 crash, where there were 298 passengers. It was shot down from a surface-to-air missile in Ukraine from 2 Russians and 1 Ukrainian. Shot down this plane. 298 people died. 196 of them were Dutch. Now, that they call their 9/11, because in a country of, at that point, 17 million, 298 people is a huge number in any universe, but especially in a universe of a country that's small. So they were already very, very skeptical, reticent of Russia. So the relationship that the Biden administration was absolutely pro-Ukraine, which was completely and 100% in alignment with the Netherlands. Now, the Prime Minister then, who later went on with President Biden's blessing to be the NATO Sec Gen, he actually was a huge rallying call to the EU, other countries. Specifically, let's even take this into NATO. So NATO, the majority of countries were under what's the 2% GDP, correct? So that before Ukraine. And it was Mark Rutte who really pushed when I say EU, but EU crossover to NATO countries to increase their defense spending. So we were in complete alignment with them. It was these conversations I was having with them. The only challenge we ever had, which is fairly openly known, was the Dutch had the money, they needed the weapons. They needed the F-16s, and we had the F-16s. They needed the Patriots, those tanks. We're the ones that make them. And so the ministers would come to me and say, we have the money. We want to send it to Ukraine. You have the goods. When can we get it? And so there was just the delay because it was a backlog. That was the only challenge they had. That was the only thing I was getting hammered on, from them. But there was just a backlog in the weapons. So, yeah.
We got a bunch. You didn't do it.
Hi, my name is Marcos. Thank you.
Marcos, hi.
Here. Kind of wanted to ask if you can continue your story earlier that Dr. Sowers asked about how you navigated the U.S. moving the goalposts continuously and basically just making the Netherlands feel like they're being told what to do. And how you just go about that diplomatically, charismatically, of course, etc.
Okay. So personally, how I did it is I had already developed really positive relationships with the ministers. So they knew I was an honest broker. So what I was saying wasn't as if I was hiding information they needed to know from the State Department or the White House, that I was telling them what I could tell them. So they had a trust in me. How I dealt with it professionally is like I took thrashings a fair amount because I needed to absorb their anger and then convey it back to state. Often it was mostly to the NSC because the NSC was kind of, they were overseeing this with commerce more than state was, but I had to convey it back that there's a real level of anger and irritation about this, and we need to come back with something. And so with that information, often at the state, they would, when I would convey that back, they would send teams in from Washington because they would understand, like, we need face-to-face, for you to come. Like, very senior people were coming from the White House and, that were working on this issue. They come in to deal with them directly, and it was kind of just to calm the waters. But that's all I could do, because they understand I was the messenger here.
How important were your personal relationships? I know you have so many friends, so affectionate, but how important was that skill in order to navigate all these ethical conflicts between different stakeholders?
Very important, because it's just like with anything. If you hear these stories about, like, let's say, I'm going to go back a little bit, like President Bush, how he used to invite Democrats in to have a beer every Friday at the White House. Like, why is he doing that? Like, oh, he's just having, no, he's actually doing that to create the relationships. Why was President Biden, when he was a senator, often, like, every Friday, he would, like, go through a list of names. He would just call, like, hey, how do you do it? It sounds silly. It sounds like you're wasting time, but actually what you're doing is building a true relationship. And so when you have that, and they also view, you're not just talking to them when you need to, you're talking to them broadly. Like, I'm a very good listener. So I'm listening to, let's say, if they happen to mention something personal, like their child, oh yeah, I've got to run, I can't do a meeting at that time because my child has a play, but so I logged something. So then afterwards, I would just text, like, hey, how did it go? Like, and there was this trust that came. So then when we did have the hard relationships, it's not coming in this negative way. It's coming in like, look, I know she cares about me. I know she cares about this issue. She's not trying to upset the apple cart, but okay, let me listen to what she has to say. It really, it is what you all have probably heard in your classes, that concept again of soft power. Like, there will always be people that, like, even like, let's say with my nomination, there were probably many, many, many people that were more qualified than me. But what tipped me over to the White House is I knew how to cultivate relationships. I had the EQ. So if there are studies that are done that shows, like, IQ and EQ, like, IQ will only get you so far, and then the EQ is what's kicking it up, and really those are the people that are excelling. So yeah, it's hugely important. So yeah.
Great. Thanks. Go ahead.
And just to, like, add on to that, I know we talked about, like, different skill sets that could be helpful, and I mean, not to be too on the nose, but we may have a future ambassador in this room or something that they may want to kind of take from this talk. And we talked about speaking and, absorbing things that are happening around us, current events habitually. So what are some just, like, other pieces of advice you have people in how they approach public service and some things that they should take away? Because I feel like I've learned so much for it over the past 10.
Okay. Well, ambassador. I have to be an executive like a president. And so, like ambassador. So, know why you're doing it. Know why you're doing it. Don't do it for the job. Don't do it because you want to be someone. Don't do it because you want the title. Do it because you have a real drive inside of you of why you're doing it. That is the biggest piece of advice I could give. And now that's not just in public service, that's in anything that you're doing, like whatever job you pursue. Know why you're doing it, because then that North Star will never leave you, and you're doing it for the right reasons. And people around you also can see when someone's being transactional versus they're doing it for the right reasons. So, sorry.
Yes, yeah, Glenn's here. So Stephanie and then Anne.
So I am not a baster, also that's where I had
Mignon? Don't forget, I'm waiting for your question, because you didn't get to ask it earlier. Okay.
I'm wondering how you balance your mental health and work and life, just because you face a very high tension, high stakes environment constantly, and I'm wondering how you decompress, or is there any advice you can decompress?
Yeah. And yeah, I have to be honest, I did not turn to do any of that. I was moving so fast, and I was so busy. And I would have to be honest, people at the embassy were worried, because they were not worried like, is she okay, but worried because I was not sleeping. I was functioning at 100% because your body actually gets used to, and I think you love it. You just kind of get used to less and less sleep. But I would say that when I could, I would make sure to touch in with my friends, because I actually do, as Tommy mentioned, I do have a lot of very, very close girlfriends who have been rooting me on. So I would say my friends, I made sure to talk to my children very daily, like even if it was just 10 minutes, but I would be connecting to my real life. This was my life for a period of time. This is not my real life. Do you understand what I'm saying? My real life are people who didn't actually care about what job I had. They just want to make sure I'm okay. So that would be it. Now, in terms of exercise, I didn't, even though I had a gym in a residence that I lived in, I still couldn't even walk up the steps. But I was like, I've got 4 hours to sleep, where I could go up for 40 minutes and exercise, and I need to go to sleep. So is that healthy? I'll be honest. It's not mentally healthy, but I also knew I was very mission driven during that period of time, because I thought, again, I did carry it. I'm the first person of color. How's the second one getting here unless I do exceptionally well and make no mistakes? Make no mistakes. So I was in that mental frame of mind that I'll be able to sleep later. This is not good advice, so please, I'm sorry. But it's realistic. It's realistic to what I experienced.
Yeah.
Earlier, you spoke about being outspoken if there weren't enough women in the room, and later on, you touched about obviously the importance of emotional intelligence, and a through line for you obviously is authenticity. So I was wondering how you balance or how you approach being assertive, because sometimes I, as a woman, worry that by trying to be assertive, it's seen as aggressive, or if I want to balance being emotionally intelligent with other people with needing to be assertive.
It is seen as aggressive.
You just want to make sure.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I'm going to try to summarize this and make sure I don't miss it, which is, I talked earlier about being outspoken and also having a high IQ, EQ. And how do I balance that? And how does one balance that with that could potentially, in terms of being outspoken, being viewed as aggressive, perhaps, and how do I balance that? So what I would say is it is seen as aggressive, and that's okay. So I'm okay with that, because why is it that the same thing I would do is viewed one way, and if a man does it, it's viewed as being proactive, and and how innovative and how thoughtful. And so I actually, now again, when I was younger, perhaps that was something that I would be more thoughtful of, like, oh gosh, But what happens, the great benefit of getting older, is you really start understanding that if you don't speak up for yourself, who is? Who's going to do it? I'm sure you have a lot of people that are supportive and loving around you and that would want to do that for you. But in these moments, it really is like you have to advocate for yourself. And I'm okay with being viewed as, how do we say it? Well, maybe, aggressive. I view it as, well, no one else is going to do it for me. And so I'll do it so the person behind me doesn't have to do it as hard. That's why I'm doing it. So, and my EQ is aware that it's often, and look, it's not always a man who's always viewing it as being aggressive. It could be another woman, right? It could be another woman that I'm not fitting her version of what she thinks I should be behaving like or dressing like or talking. And she can live in that space. I'm not worried about it because there will always be, no matter what you do, there will always be someone who has an issue to hear. Just be true to yourself. Now, again, some people say that's easier said than done, but I was saying earlier, actually, I think we were talking about it, about what I always remember is the absolute hardest thing that happened in my life, whatever that is. I would say that to anybody. And make that your core point of, if I got through that, it's nothing. And that's what I always used to think about when people would say things to me or make me feel as if I was being too aggressive. I would just think, one, no one else is doing it for me, and two, I've been so much worse. I can do it. Hey, fine. So, yeah.
So we're going to go with Mulan, and then Viveka, I'm going to let you, Viveka put, probably 100 hours of work into this and organizing and all that, so you definitely get, last question on this. And then we're going to, there's no way we're going to get to all the questions, so we'll have some time at the end, and I apologize if I didn't get there. You can come up and we can mosh Shefali and try to answer that. So Mulan.
Like a selfie too.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Go ahead.
Mulan, thank you for speaking to us. I think in this morning session you mentioned that even today, or in this session, you were championing, altruism and really like bringing up the voices of like those that are more marginalized and unheard. And I believe you also did a lot of work with Human Rights Watch instances, right? So with those experiences, with those values, bringing it into policy work, I was wondering if you could talk about like how that interplay was like in really championing those values. Especially a lot of times I feel like just like in like industry and stuff like that, like ethics is really championed because it's like a hot topic now, right? It's like, oh, this is something that we need to talk about, but it's really nominal. It's not really active or applied, and so it sounds good, and so we want to like talk about it, and so we push for it. But when it starts being more inefficient, right? When stakeholders don't get as much profit out of it, right? It's in those instances, it's kind of like pushed to the back, right? So how do you bring it to the front?
Yeah. Well, I would say in terms of both my political work and also my policy work, my political work before I became an ambassador, and then governmental work. The only reason I was able to do, I would actually say it's almost the third rung, which was the human rights, the going towards socioeconomic neighborhoods, women's rights, minority rights, all of that was as long as I did the main thing I was certified for extremely well, which was the bilateral and the multilateral work. I couldn't necessarily, for instance, if I wasn't doing those well, I couldn't bring in this whole different aspect, which again, at the embassy, they had never seen someone who talked about eating disorders or talked about assault. Like I was talking very openly about, I'm very open about this, like I've had anorexia twice. I've been assaulted twice by strangers on the street. So I would talk about that. And so the only reason I could do that is if I did what I was sent there to do, extreme strength. So in terms of integrating it into the actual policy work, it would really depend on how I could weave it in. Like, for instance, when the UN brought in their then ambassador for women's rights, human rights, came to the Netherlands, I made sure that I was on the panel. I wasn't supposed to be on the panel, but I said, I can speak to this. So that's how. But by then, I had already developed both the reputation of excelling in my policy work and also that these were priorities of mine.
Great.
Yeah.
Viveka.
Okay. So I came to Duke not really knowing kind of what my life would look like after the fact, but I came here knowing that I would be guided by public service and knowing that I would have some kind of net good in this world. And I'm not the most religious, but if I have learned anything from my Hindu mother, it's the concept of karma, that whatever I put out into this world, the good things that I put out in this world, will hopefully come back to me in the actions that I provide for others. And that's why I came to Duke, because that's what I wanted to pursue. I came in pursuit of that. And I've seen a lot of that attitude in you, and it's made me really excited about what I could do. I'm not sure what that looks like yet, but I just know that I want to lead it with that attitude, and that's made me honestly really emotional today. So I guess my final question for you is...
This is the first to get. It's a sign of distress.
I know this.
It's a sign of distress when the flag is upside down. So I'm like, what's up? What's
I
up?
guess one thing I wanted to say is, what has been the most notable moment in your career of like karma in action, where you've seen something good that you've done in this world just come to fruition in a way that has been most satisfying to you?
Oh, such a nice question. Yeah, it's
Thank you so much.
So, actually, it's a really nice moment, which was, and I'm bringing this back to when I was announced, went through all that process, and then I was held by a particular senator because he was upset with President Biden. I had nothing to do with the topic, but he was upset, and he just arbitrarily held me. There was like a army of people that I had known over the course of I had worked 17 years on various political campaigns, that I always tried to be kind and fair and good and not demonize people, and there was like an army of people that when they found out I was just sitting in this kind of purgatory waiting, there was something that bubbled up to anger in this group of people, and they started like a full-on assault with a Senate, and they were making calls, and they were just upset about, of all people to hold, why are you holding her? Like, she's who we should be sending out. And in my heart, I viewed that as all those years of me being really kind to people, being fair and good, trying to be all these things, and I never asked anything of them. I didn't realize how much it was infusing into their hearts, that they got very protected. And so I think that was something that made me really happy.
All right. So, Viveka, excellent job co-moderating. I'll do this with you. And Shefali, my friend, on behalf of Science and Society, American Grant Strategy, Investor Chain, Women in National Security, and the audience here, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us tonight. And we'll have a few minutes. Again, if I didn't get to your questions, I'm sorry.